Hey, welcome back. Today's episode is fire. We had filmed the first interview, which was episode 3 back in March of 2020, and I quickly realized that I had to reevaluate how we went forward with these interviews because scheduling several in-person interviews in one day was not going to be an option. So this episode was recorded back in the summer of 2020. And it was just Jasmine and I and the video team. Shout out to Vanessa Helio from 41 Films. But I wanted to make the most of our time together. And so we had a more in-depth conversation and really dove deep into our stories, into our work, and specifically how we both have had to shift our perspectives on our worth as Latinas. Jasmine is an amazing orator, and she shares so much wisdom every single time I hang out with her. She is a photographer, she's the founder of a nonprofit, and a huge advocate for mental health. And she's also my friend. So please enjoy our conversation. I'm so excited to have Jasmine here. We know each other from the wedding industry. We've been friends for probably over 5 years.
Yeah.
I think so. But we always have like these meaningful conversations where I walk away feeling so loved, so inspired, so encouraged. And so I'm just so glad that she can be here to have a conversation with me today. She is the co-founder and executive director of a nonprofit. She's an artist, she's a photographer, she does all the things, and she's also your oily best friend, which we will get into later. But I'm just so excited to talk to you today about all the things.
I know, I'm excited too. I can't wait.
Yeah. So why don't we start out from the beginning, from when we first met in the wedding industry. Tell me about that.
Yes. So we have a mutual friend that we both worked with. And I'll never forget, she shot me a DM and was like, I need to introduce you to my friend, Karina. You guys have so much in common. You guys both have kids, you both homeschool, and you're both photographers. And I was like, yeah, send me your information. And then it wasn't until I think we actually met up where I realized that you were Latina too.
Yeah.
And that was, I think you were one of my first Latina friends in the industry where we really began to have some of these dialogues and conversations around what does it mean to be Latina working in a predominantly white space.
Yeah, I feel like, yes, that was the first time. I feel like we were challenging each other without actually knowing it.
Yes.
And I feel like we went through the whole journey of, and we'll get into the journey, but like realizing the space that we were in and our role in it.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I'm thankful that you started that conversation and we started it together. And yes, I forgot to say she's also a homeschool mom, or she was a homeschool mom, and that's another way that we connected.
Mm-hmm.
Because we don't, or at least at that time, I did not have many Latina homeschool mom influences, and so I didn't know that other Latinas were also homeschooling, and so that was another thing that I feel like it just clicked, and we're just like, oh my goodness, we need to be friends.
Yes.
Yeah, so can you go a little bit deeper about how the wedding industry as a whole is a predominantly white space and how we realized our role in that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think for me, so I've been working in the industry for, how long has it been? Like over 10 years now. And I think one of the first things I noticed was just how segregated our wedding industry is. Meaning that if it's a Latino wedding, typically all the vendors are Latino. If it's a Russian wedding, it's all Russian vendors. And so I just began to see how much these spaces were so segregated, and just some of the marketing strategies that I think were taught, like show what you want to book. The demographic is typically more affluent, bigger budgets, and that's typically those who are Caucasian. And so for me personally, I felt like in order for me to have access to a space that I've never been in, I have to figure out how do I almost assimilate, or how do I deny who I am so that I can be able to be seen and that my work can show for itself and get hired then. And then after assimilating, realizing that that's not enough, actually, that I still wasn't chosen and I would still not get booked. And then I would get challenging comments like, you're not worth what you're charging. Oh, I didn't realize you charge that much. And so there was a lot of like brokenness that I was experiencing in it. And I think because I had disconnected from my own sense of self and my own cultural identity, I didn't know how to process through that healthily, because at that time I didn't have other mentors or other Latinas in the industry who were going through or experiencing some of the things that I was experiencing. And I don't really think this was a conversation or dialogue that was happening during that time period either. Especially when I was just starting out. It was more like, how do I get these like beautiful, pretty couples to book me when I'm not in that circle, when I don't live in that space, when I don't shop in those spaces, when I don't fit that, when I don't look what I'm trying to hire or be hired for. And so those were some of the internal struggles that I personally struggled with and went through.
Yeah. And I feel like I was also, like, I took the workshops that told you this is how you get booked.
Mm-hmm.
And I was doing all of the things. And I was like, I'm still not getting the same success as my other friend who is doing this exact same things that I'm doing.
Mm-hmm.
Like, why is that? Like, I thought it was something wrong with me.
Yep.
And I don't know if I shared this story with you, but I went to a client meeting, and at that time, like, it was, so backstory, I work with my husband on weddings, and so he is white. And I went to this client meeting, and it was just me. And they actually asked me, they're just like, but your husband's white, right? And I said, yes. And they're just like, okay, we just want to make sure that, your husband's, I think they like backtracked or they didn't know what to say. And after that, I was shocked. I'm like, you are asking me if they were to my face saying that I alone did not have enough value to photograph their wedding.
Mm-hmm.
And they just wanted to make sure that there was someone that was going to be there that was white. And after that, I feel like that's when the shift started to happen. And it was something that I talked to my husband about, but I couldn't really process why I was feeling that way, because I had tried to assimilate and put myself in these spaces thinking that if I just did XYZ, that I would be able to get the same success as everyone else. And I feel like that was that turning point that no, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you do all of the things, if you have the nice clothes, if you have the nice investment guide, it didn't matter.
Yep.
And so, yes, I feel like that was a huge realization that I was ascribing to things that I thought would work, and they didn't, just because of the color of my skin. And I feel like when I would talk to you, like, we would experience these things on our own, but then when we would talk about it, we'd be like, oh my goodness, it's not just me.
Yeah.
It's not like just an isolated experience. This is something that is systemic across the board.
And I think for me, a turning point was after I started getting all these inquiries and people not wanting to book me, even though my work was comparable to who they ended up booking. I believed the lie that I was being judged, right? And not the lie, but what I did was, to respond out of it, was I changed my name. So my business at the time was Jazzy Photo. And so I changed my name, and my last name is Lopez. So I'm Jasmine Lopez. One of the top 5 Latino popular last names. And so for me, I was like, I'm being judged by what I look like, by my name. And so what would it look like if I cut out my name and only use Jazzy? And that way it would help me to be seen more and not be so quickly associated to the Lopez last name. Because, I mean, there's these stereotypes, right, within the Latino community. When you think about it, how it plays out in other industries. Like when you want, you know, an affordable or cheap mechanic, you hire a Latino or a Mexican oftentimes, someone to clean your house, a landscaper. And so you see a lot of these stereotypes then be transferred over to those of us who are doing creative things or in the creative industry. And there's this assumption that because we're Latino, we charge less than our counterparts, even though our experience, our portfolio, everything we're doing is the same thing. But yet there's this assumption that we charge less, and so therefore we must charge less.
Yeah. So talk more about the name change.
Yes.
Jazzy Photo. Tell me, like, how that journey.
Yes. So about 3 years ago, I'll never forget, I was scrolling through my Instagram, and as I'm looking through, I'm like, oh my gosh, like, this does not look like me. This does not represent who I really am. And I just felt like I was going through this process of, it was a moment in time. It was like almost a pause where it was like two paths that I could decide to walk down. I could continue to go down the path I was going down, which at this point, you know, I was doing in-person sales, doing really well with that kind of thing, had a studio in Riverside, which is an affluent white community. And so I was at this pivotal moment where I was like, I could either do one or two things, continue down the path I'm going, or I can redefine what this means and what this looks like, and embark in the truth and celebrate the truth of who I am and all of who I am as a mom, as a Latina, as a person of faith, as someone who was married to someone where we both didn't have fathers in our home and are trying to change the legacy in our family. And so what does that look like? And so I began to do a lot of unpacking, a lot of learning, a lot of gaining language for the experiences that I was experiencing in the wedding industry and also in other spaces that I was in. Because prior to that moment, we weren't really in white spaces. We went to Latino churches, Black churches. We did life with people of color. That's just our everyday life. And so it wasn't until, you know, getting into more white spaces where we started experiencing being fetished or experiencing being tokenized or experiencing, you know, like, oh my gosh, you speak Spanish, you're from Puerto Rico, like that. And I had never experienced that before. And so in this season, I had to really partner it with God and be able to really say, who is Jasmine? Not Jazzy. Who is Jasmine Lopez? And how do I reconcile and celebrate all of who I am, and what does that mean, and what does that look like? And I knew that if I wanted to move forward in where I was going with photography and my passion, I couldn't just rebrand Jazzy Photo. I had to end it and start something new, and that's what I did. And so my husband and I together came up with the name called Authentic Adventure. And it was through that where we're just like, this represents and celebrates all of who we are. And we're going to celebrate the highs and the lows. Because I think that's another thing I really struggled with after going to all the workshops and hearing people talk about like how I made 6 figures my first year. I'm like, that's such a lie. I really wanted to create our brands to celebrate our highs and our lows, because I wanted people to see the in-between of how we got to where we're getting to today. And we're not there yet, right? We're still learning, we're still growing. We haven't hit financial numbers that we have longed and aspired to get to. But in that process, we want to show people what that looks like and what that means and how you can do that truly out of the fullness of who we are, and not based on what society and culture says we should do.
Yes, for sure. And I feel like you said, that goes against what the industry workshops are teaching, because they're saying, or they were like 5 years ago, like you need to be niche down and don't talk about everything else. And so I feel like that's what I had done. Like people that I would meet didn't even know I had kids, or that I homeschooled, and I was trying to keep everything so separate. And I was one person when I would go to networking events, and I was another person when I was like at home with the kids and trying to like teach them Spanish. I was another person with my family. And yeah, I saw you doing that and I was like, oh, what is she doing? I'm like, this is awesome, but I don't know how this works.
Yes. I didn't know how it worked either. Yeah. And I think what helped me in the process is I named it and I shared it on Instagram with my people, my family, my friends. And I was like, this is where I'm at and this is what it's going to look like. And I don't know if it's going to work. I don't know what this means, but I'm going to do it because I feel like this is what I need to do in order to be fully who I am as Jasmine.
Yeah, and I think that was the best thing that you could have done. I feel like a lot of people have been able to look to you as an example to be okay with opening up and be okay with sharing more of themselves, or at least diving in and looking inwardly to question that stuff. I feel like I was going through that internal tension myself at around the same time, and I appreciated you sharing it publicly because it gave me like I don't know, it gave me hope that I wasn't alone, even though at that time I wasn't ready to share publicly because I didn't have the words. I feel like, especially because I was married to, or I am married to someone who is white, and so like our experiences are completely different. And what, like, as we're raising biracial kids, like that conversation looks a lot differently, and I was learning the language to be able to like celebrate my culture while also finding the words to positively talk about my husband's culture. And so at that point, I don't think I had even acknowledged his culture. And the kids did not even know that they were like half German. They thought that my husband was Mexican just because that's all we talked about in our home. And I had made such a separation of that part of my life and our lives that the kids didn't even know. And it's been a journey, but it was interesting because I was one person at home celebrating like my heritage, my culture, but then when I went out into the world, I was embracing my husband's culture and trying to assimilate to that. So I feel like, yeah, it was a journey for me to be able to share more publicly. But I feel like your influence has really influenced a lot of people, especially me, in finding the words and like feeling okay that I'm confused as to why I'm not at the same level as other people who are doing the same things as I was. So yeah,
and I think if I can speak into that, those were similar thoughts that I struggled with, and I personalized it as, well, what am I doing wrong then? And not understanding that there are actual systems that exist. Not that, not to play into like a victim mentality, but also understanding the tension of the fact that systems exist and different privileges exist and all of those things. And so trying to figure out, how does someone who comes from a low income home or upbringing now get into a spirit influence where affluence is? Because typically it's like, I think the percentage is like 80% of white wealth stays with white wealth. So it's like, how does someone who's not white, who comes from a lower income, tap into a network that I don't have access to? And so I think that's something we need to talk more about, is like, what does that look like? And how do we do that? And how do we say that there is enough of the pie for all of us to be successful? And how do we get a seat at the table? And maybe not at the seat at the table, then maybe how do we create our own table? And what does that look like? And what does that mean?
Yeah. And that, like, speaking on creating your own table, I feel like that's what we have been doing, like, separately, but also together, like, just talking about, like, who do we know that we can bring together for these conversations. And that brings me to your actual bringing together at the table. Do you want to share a little bit about like your idea or how you have actually brought people together around a table to have these conversations?
Yeah. So, in what context? In the at the table event? So,
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So, I have dreamed of like I have always loved as a little girl. I have always loved the areas of justice. I've seen how it has played out in my life, and it's something that I'm truly grateful for. It wasn't anything that was taught to me because I feel like I experienced a lot of anti-blackness growing up because my family. I'm pretty light skinned, but my family actually has very strong Eurocentric features. So very, very pale white skin with colored eyes, blonde hair that then turned dark. So I was the dark girl in my family. And so as a result, I experienced a lot of anti-blackness. And in the midst of that, and not as a little kid, not having language for it, I've always been drawn to different cultures, different people of color, learning about culture, learning about countries. And so that just is something that naturally comes to me that I love and see value in, and didn't realize that isn't how everybody sees each other. And so as I've grown up and as I've developed and changed this brand to Authentic Adventure, something I wanted to start was called At the Table, and it's in different kinds of events. It could be workshops, it could be dinner, it could be like an art opportunity to like do watercolor, different things like that. But really the goal is to bring all people together, women I should say, bring all people together of different races, ethnicities, but also class. I think oftentimes when we talk about being in relationship with friends and having diverse circles, typically we stick with when we have diverse circles, it's typically ethnically and racially, but not class difference. And so, because we stick with what we know with and what we're comfortable with. So, if we live in a certain community, we stick in that community. And so, at the table is this idea of what does it look like to bring all of those three intersections together, and not being like identifying, oh, you're the poor person, you're the more wealthier person, but truly bringing together a diverse group of women together to embark on relationship and to have a dialogue. What does that mean and what does that look like? Even different seasons of life. Some of the women that came were single, some were married, some were divorced, some have children, some don't. And so really making sure that there's true diversity in the circle so that it brings value to each of our lived experiences. And I truly believe that's when we get to learn from each other, when we can come and sit at the table and have a dialogue around whatever topic, but there's different voices there being represented and listened to in that process.
Yes.
So that's what At the Table is. Due to COVID, we haven't been able to do it, but right before COVID happened, we hosted a watercolor workshop, and it was beautiful. Gathered different women together. It was just a time to self-reflect and focus inward and partner that with art. And so it's something I truly care about and am passionate about. And once we can start meeting in person again, we'll start planning what these future At the Table events can look like.
Yeah, for sure. And I was so excited to take part in one of them. And so I hope that, we can do this again.
Yes, and what's so cool is that many of the ladies have now become friends. They all follow each other on Instagram. I met with one friend the other day, and she's like, I just had lunch with another friend that was at the table gathering. And so it's so neat to see how creating the space then can create another type of space for deeper relationships and friendships to be formed, even if we don't look the same, live the same, or believe the same.
So I know that it took like a huge journey and a huge like pivot point to get you to where you are now. So do you want to share all of the things that you're doing now?
Yeah, it's a lot. So I have to give kind of some backstory. So we moved to a community called Maywood, Illinois. It's a predominantly African American Latino community. with a growing Latino population. And so we purchased a house there. Oh my gosh, it's like 3.5 years now. And I remember it was 3.5 years ago. This is when I was starting my entire process of like basically like deconstructing my identity and all of these things. And so when we moved to Maywood, it was a struggle at first for me because I don't know about you and what it was like in your context, but for me, growing up in a lower income home with a single mom, there's this idea or this belief that like you move to like an affluent white community and you never look back. Like you don't move to black and brown communities. Like that is a sign of success. And so when we purchased the property 3.5 years ago and it was in a community that's black and brown, I was like, man, and because we were in white spaces, I was like, why can't we live in the West Loop like the rest of our friends? And in the beginning, I had this really poor attitude about why we were there. And I'll never forget, I had gone on a vision trip to El Salvador with our church, and it revolutionized my whole mind, my whole thinking about the whole thing. And basically what I learned out there is that poverty is multifaceted. It's not just lack of resources. It's broken relationships, it's abuse of power, and so many other things. And what I loved about this nonprofit in El Salvador and what they're doing is that they don't take the approach or the mindset that they're Americans coming to El Salvador to save El Salvador. They believe that the solutions and the needs can be met by the community. And so what they do is they partner with the church, and they show them that they can be the hands and feet of Jesus in their own communities. And so for me, I was just like, man, I wonder if there's a deeper reason, a deeper purpose as to why we moved to Maywood. And so when we came back home from that trip, I'm just like, my mind is just like all over the place. I'm like, okay, God, what are you trying to tell me here? What are you trying to say? And I just remember having this dialogue of looking around, and on my block, my house was like one of the renovated houses. My next door neighbor had like a broken window, and then on the other side was abandoned property. And so that's pretty consistent within our community. And I remember looking around and just being like, but I don't know how to fix houses. That's not something that I can do. And so I'm like, but I am a creative, I'm a photographer, and I have so many amazing creative friends in the industry. So what would it look like to get some sort of building or a space where we can host workshops and teach these kind of skill sets to the youth in our community? And so, I don't know, that one night, as this idea just like popped in my head, I went on the MLS and found a firehouse in the community that was for sale. And for me, again, I was like, if I'm going to invest in property or invest in getting a space, I would rather invest in my own community than go to a space outside of my community. Mm-hmm. And so we found this firehouse that I was just like, oh my gosh. And I was so new in my process that I had a lot of like broken mindsets over myself and beliefs about myself. As in addition to that, like a poverty mindset. So I was like, oh, we can't buy that. We can't afford that. And so it was this journey of not just unpacking my cultural identity and the truth of that, but the truth of breaking off poverty mindsets over myself. And so we went through this journey over the next year of what does it look like to try to purchase this firehouse? Can we do it? And so what we ended up having to do was sell the property to be able to purchase the firehouse. And that whole story is full of like miracles and just craziness. I won't get into the details of that, but we ended up buying a firehouse and I'll never forget when we got the keys to the house. I'm like, holy freak, this is real. This just happened.
Yeah.
How did this happen? How did we get this? How did we get this property? Because there were like, at the same time, there was like 2 or 3 other offers on the table, and somehow we were the ones selected to get it. And so that started this journey of starting this nonprofit called the Firehouse Dream, where we teach creative skill sets. And by we, I mean creative. So it's not me doing it, it's me partnering with other creatives to give back to the community or give back to their own communities. And so we started the nonprofit about 2 years ago. We received our 501c3 last year. It took almost a year process
I remember
of actually getting it,
yeah.
Which was just like a season of growth. It was a season of pruning for me. It was a season of continual identifying truth within myself, again gaining language from my experiences, and then also being new to nonprofit sector, seeing how power dynamics play out, really learning how systemic racism has impacted my community and how it's become what it's become today. Under-resourced communities don't just become under-resourced. There's a reason. There's systemic racism that's a part of that plays into a factor of that. And so I needed to learn the history to understand what had happened to Maywood and why it became how it's become. And I think one of the biggest misconceptions that I think in society and in America that we believe is that we don't care about our own communities, and by we meaning the people who live in their own communities, and that is the biggest lie ever. What I have learned over the last 2 years is that there are so many of us who are invested in our communities, who are desiring change, but we face challenges like resources, or we don't have all the tools that we need to be able to make the difference that we hope to make. And in addition to that, when we think about the philanthropic dollar that's available out there, it's like I want to be misquoted, but I believe it's like a $400 million industry, or billion, I can't remember if it's million or billion, but in all of that, Latino-led nonprofits only get 1.1% of the pie, which means that we are underrepresented. Our voices aren't being considered. Our stories and lived experiences aren't being considered. And so I sit in that tension of, wow, first of all, there's barely any Latina-led nonprofits in general, so that's a weight that I carry and an honor that I hold as well. But at the same time, I believe that this is a community-led nonprofit, and so what does that look like and what does it mean? I am not the face of the nonprofit. This is not about Jasmine's dream. It's about co-creating and partnering with the youth and the community to bring the solutions to the community. So that's a little bit about what we're doing now with the Firehouse Stream.
Yeah, and I like how throughout this whole journey, you said it took like a year to get your 501c3, and it was a 3.5-year process from when you first bought your house in Maywood and you sold it to purchase the Firehouse.
Yeah.
Like, you were sharing pretty openly about the whole journey, and I feel like that piece was and is so important because, like you said, people don't know that this is happening, or that communities like this, like Maywood, are that underrepresented, not financially poured into for a reason. And I appreciated you sharing that journey and the struggles, especially like doing all the paperwork yourself for the 501c3, and how you navigated through that during hard seasons. Because I know that there was a time when, I think it was like last year, when the government was shut down, and what that meant for you, and what that meant for you as a Latina nonprofit, as opposed to a nonprofit that has money and has like the funds to push their paperwork through, and the knowledge to like call the specific offices to get your paperwork pushed through.
And that was a challenge, like constantly needing to, and I think that's one of the challenges that often isn't considered, is like, you know, for those of us who are trying to start these types of initiatives or projects or nonprofits, there is an element of need for like time freedom in order to do that. But for a lot of our community, we're working long days, multiple jobs, so time freedom to be able to do these kinds of ideas or living out of this dream that we have is a challenge. And so for me I'm grateful for the time freedom. That is a privilege that I have. And so I sit in that tension and I recognize, I mean, even with COVID, I think the numbers were like 1 in 6 Latino families can work from home, and everyone else is an essential worker. I had to sit in that tension and recognize this is my privilege. And so what am I going to do? and how I'm going to use my time freedom in a way that's advocating for my community and in a way that is saying, hey, our voice is here, it has value, and we are, like, don't miss it. Like, we are here, this is our perspective. So with that being said, with the nonprofit, with the government shutdown, I had to like call once a month. Sometimes it took like up to an hour to get through the line to just talk to somebody to see if there's an update. And then I remember one specific time I was given an update that it had been finally assigned to somebody. And then the next month I called back and they're like, no ma'am, it hasn't been assigned to anybody. And I was just devastated. I remember crying and just being like, what is happening? Like, why is this taking so long? I had this fear that it was literally just sitting on someone's desk, on some table. And so I had this fear it's gonna get lost, it's gonna take so much longer. But in the midst of that, I just felt like it was an invitation of don't miss what this season of waiting means for you and continue to do what you can do. So in that season of waiting for me, I was continuing to work on my inner self, continuing to go to therapy, do some inner healing within my own identity, because I can't lead something that's I'm broken from myself within my own identity. Yeah. And then also building trust in the community. So showing up to board meetings, showing up to other community-led meetings, joining other nonprofits and their initiatives, and really building deeper relationships, because that's one of the avenues of poverty, that's the multifaceted that I mentioned, broken relationships. So if I can build relationships and build trust, and for the season that I'm here in my community and let people know that I am here for the community and this is what it's going to look like and this is how I can advocate, then that's what I'm going to do. And so in that season of waiting, that's the only option I had, was just continuing to believe that this was going to happen, while also doing what I can with the relationships that I had built in the community.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, so I'd like for you to paint a picture of what the firehouse looks like. I know you bought the firehouse,
yes.
And I feel like in people's minds, they might think of a firehouse looking a specific way. Can you talk us through like what it was like when you purchased it and all that you've like done
yes.
inside and outside to the space?
Yeah, so we just made 2 years in the firehouse in June. And it looks completely different now than what it looked like when we first bought it. When we first purchased it, so it's technically sectioned off in 2 levels. So the first level, or the garage, is where it's originally where the horses were. And then later on, around I think the 40s is when they changed from horses to engines. So that's where the fire truck used to be stored. And then you go upstairs, and upstairs is the living area. So the previous owner, he was a carpenter, so he put a lot of work into like beautiful hardwood floors and all the wood detail, which I'm super grateful for, but he was not very keen to aesthetic style. So we have transformed it into the upstairs, the living space where we're at, my husband and I and my 3 girls. It's not really conducive for a family of 5, but we call the firehouse like our in-between space. Like, we knew that this is just a temporary living space for us to be able to purchase it for the nonprofit, and then in a couple of years our plan is to move out of it. But in the meantime, we've decorated and styled it. We've done whatever renovations, DIY projects that we could. And so the previous owner had done a huge chunk of the work upstairs, but hadn't done any work downstairs. And that's where most of the work needed to be done. So it's crazy how much it's been transformed. But we had to do all brand new electrical, which was kind of scary for us because we're like, oh my gosh, because it had its original electrical from the early 1900s. It had never been redone. So we had to do brand new electrical. We painted all the brick to white. I wanted like this Manhattan style loft look. We don't have anything like that in Maywood. There's tons of beautiful loft spaces in Chicago, but we don't have anything like that. And so I'm like, I want this space to look beautiful. I want it to be like, this is for us. This is for the community. This is for the youth. And so it's designed very open space, lofty, let's see what else. The furniture that's in there, it's all mobile, so it's all on wheels, so that we can move things around and be able to design the space according to whatever the specific needs are. We have a huge projection screen with a stage where we could do like podcasting. We can do speaker events. We're thinking like poetry slam, storytelling nights, and then we have a workshop station that we're talking about turning into like a maker's space. That's going to have like a laser cutter. We have a large format printer that was donated to us earlier this year, which we're so grateful for. We have a vinyl cutter. We're looking into possibly getting a DTG printer. Anything that could be entrepreneurial based for our youth, where they can have access to tools and equipment, where they can turn an idea that they have into an actual business that's based around the creative industry. And so that area, and then the last little area is our production area where we do music, video, cinematography, and my husband's over that area.
Yeah, I know you do all the things. And you just had a workshop that I know that you had been talking about for a long time, and you had this vision. I don't know. I feel like since I first heard about the Firehouse Dream, like this has been your vision, and to see it actually come to life, like I'm just so happy and so excited for you. But tell me more about what you are already starting to do, and like what your vision for the Firehouse Dream is like in next year, 2 years, 5 years.
So right now, because of COVID, everything got shut down. Prior to COVID, I was volunteering at the local high school, sponsoring the photo club. So we had a group of youth there. And then COVID happened and we weren't able to meet up. And so in that process, we just finished as much of the renovations as we could finish for phase 1 within our being. So my husband basically DIY'd the rest of the stuff that had to get done, because he's just felt it so deep within himself, where he was like, I need to finish the space. I don't know why, but I feel like it needs to be done. And then COVID happened, and we were like, oh yeah, because all the stores were shut down and we wouldn't have been able to do much, while in the very beginning months of April and March and April. So what we did this past week, or actually now 2 weeks ago, we held our first 1 week intensive, and basically it was a 5-hour workshop where each day we covered a different topic. We did financial literacy, brand identity, how do you build an authentic brand. We did a day of photography, a day of film, and then a day of social media. How do you go viral? How do you grow your social media? And we had it ranged from day to day, but we had anywhere from 4 to like 8 youth come through, and they got to learn these different topics. And what was the coolest thing, I think, of the entire week is that the filming day, my husband led that day. He taught them about storytelling and how to tell a story. And then after lunch for the second session, they actually filmed a music video of one of our youth playing the piano, and they got to set up the shot. He showed them how to do everything, and then they got to like direct it. And then after that, they actually edited the film. So by the end of that specific workshop, our youth walked away with a finished product of a film, so that they can show and say, hey, look, I was a part of this. This is what I did. So now they have job experience that they can add to their portfolio. And then they have a final product that they can show. And so everyone has access to that. And so really the goal is to teach our youth skill sets, creative skill sets, so that they can be able to gain entrepreneurial opportunities or have access to then working in the creative industry. And then we also, in the future, our goal is, and this is going to happen within the next few months, but once they go through the program, the hope is to have them be able to then have access to our equipment. Because what I'm realizing is that's the challenge. The challenge is not them being exposed to creativity, because initially that's what it was. I thought it was. Initially it was like, oh, we're gonna like show them creativity, we're gonna like bring them in, show them photography. And what I'm learning is that no, our youth are very, very, one, they're into technology, so social media is huge, but they already have interests in photography, video, graphic design, podcasting. The thing is that they don't have the tools to help them to create the content that they're looking to create. So our goal now is to help basically allow them to have access to the tools so that they can start creating the content that they're looking to create in partnership with the Firehouse Dream. So whether they use the space or whether they use the equipment, it will help them to be able to start amplifying their stories and their voices based around the things that matter to them.
Yeah, which is great because I feel like in the creative space, like all the tools and all the things that we use are so expensive.
Mm-hmm.
And even education itself is so expensive, and a lot of people go into debt trying to purchase, and rather than like using the money and the profit they might get from a job, they have to then put that back because they've spent so much money on the tools and the resources. So I feel like it's like that is the piece like that is so needed and that nobody talks about because everyone always pushes education or just buy the expensive stuff and you'll be able to pay it back, like just take a loan out, but no one puts together that financial piece with the actual like reality of people's financial place that they are in their lives.
It's a huge investment. Like I remember when I was at that cusp of needing to get my first 5D3 mark, and I was just like, where am I gonna get $3,500 for this? Like how? And so I remember, and we didn't do that. We would do a little booking and then put those funds and invest it back into purchasing new equipment. And we also took a season to live with family so that we can take what we were paying for rent and invest it into the business. But I know that's not everyone's story or opportunity. And so having the tools is a huge, huge, huge challenge for my youth. I remember when the protests were happening, I had several youth reach out to me and say, hey, is there any way through the Firehouse Dream that we can use the equipment because I want to go to protests and photograph or document what's happening, but I don't have this lens or I don't have this camera. And so I'm like, we need to figure this out because we want to help bring the solution to the challenge. And so if they're saying we want to do X, Y, Z, but we don't have this, so my thing is, well, how do we meet the need of what it is that they need? And it not be a thing of like, no, it has to be through the Firehouse Dream. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, no, it's how do we help meet the needs of the community and the youth and really listening to what they're saying so that we can figure out creative solution and strategy around it. And I feel like that's where we're at right now. Right now, we're just trying to figure out, well, what are the legalities? Like, what happens if it accidentally gets dropped or broken? Will the insurance cover it? So those are some of the things we're navigating through now, but we're hoping to, by the end of the year, have that figured out so that our youth has the access to the equipment sooner than later.
Yeah, and I think that's so beautiful. I feel like a lot of times people, and I know that you've experienced this before, that people feel like they're not listening to the needs of a community or a person and just kind of like throw a bunch of stuff and say like, hey, this is what you need, or let me just spend a bunch of money on like fixing this part without actually partnering and listening to what the needs are. And so I appreciate that you have like been so vocal about like the experience that you're going through, because I feel like it opens people's eyes to what reality is instead of what people think reality is, because they don't know or they're not in this situation, but they have their own perceived biases, opinions on how they could come and save a situation.
Yeah. And I think that's a challenge that I'm constantly having to be aware of, and something that I tell my board and my staff, like, we are not here to save Maywood. And we take a very different approach in terms of what does it look like to co-create together. So prior to the 1 week intensive, we held a meeting with the youth and said, let's dream and imagine together what this could look like. And so we created the 1 week intensive actually based off of their interests and the types of workshops that they were looking to learn from. So it wasn't me saying, hey, these are the workshops we're doing and this is how we're going to do it. No, we created the 1 week intensive based off of the specific needs of the youth and what they wanted. And we're going to continue to do that. We're going to continue to include their voices because their voices are so needed and they have strong voices and strong opinions and they want to feel seen and heard too. And so that's something we really want to make sure that we're doing is that we're partnering with our youth to co-create or co-design what our we have our mission and our vision set, but what our programming is going to look like.
Yeah, and I love that because I feel like the industry that we come from, the wedding industry, is completely opposite. Like you're taught, like, oh no, you need to do a workshop and teach this specific thing because this person needs that, or you need to come into this workshop because you need this. So yeah, I love what you're doing and like shifting the narrative. I want to do a hard pivot because I want to talk about what you mean when you say you're my oily best friend.
Yes. Oh my gosh. So I have been on a health and wellness journey for over 10 years now. That's just been a part of my story. Have had a lot of gut issues. I have thyroid, which now has turned into an autoimmune condition called Hashimoto's. And so I've just been on this journey of trying to learn and what does it mean to advocate for myself and my health. And find different ways that I can be able to do that, whether it's through diet, now with essential oils, and so much more. And for me, I think this journey really started because we didn't always have the resources to see the kind of doctors who could help us, because either we didn't have insurance or because the investment was just a lot that we couldn't take on that time. And so I've had to kind of figure out ways that could help support my own health and wellness journey. So I started using oils, essential oils, about 5 years ago, but I really didn't make it a part of my everyday life until about 2 years ago. And so now I am a Young Living distributor and I love it. And one of my biggest convictions and challenges have been, what does it look like to help equip and partner with other friends of color to help them see that there are other alternative options out there? I'm not against medicine. I don't think medicine or doctors are bad, but I think there can be a healthy, beautiful balance between being proactive with our health and then when needed to see a doctor, we could see a doctor. And so it's something I'm super passionate about. I love it. I joke around and I tell everyone on Instagram, I'm going to be your oily best friend. And really what that means is let's journey together, let's learn together. I don't know it all. I don't have it all figured out. I'm on my own journey of figuring out what this means and looks like for me and my family. But one of the biggest reasons why I got into essential oils was because of my own mental health. So around it's all around the same time of this whole gaining language, going to therapy. Mental health became a really strong issue. Not an issue, that's not the word I want to use. It became prevalent in my life and I think it was always there. I just hadn't paid attention to the warning signs. So I received the official diagnoses of depression, anxiety, and then PTSD for some of the childhood trauma that I had experienced. And so I wanted to use, with the approval of my doctor, always, I wanted to use supplements and essential oils as a way to help me through my journey and see if that could help. My doctor was totally okay with it. She said, Jasmine, it's one or the other. You absolutely need something. Not doing something's not an option. And I'm okay with you using supplements and essential oils. It's going to take time, whichever route you go. But I need you to make a decision. So I made the decision with the supplements and said, I'll give myself 3-4 months to see if they help. And if they don't, then I need to make the transition into going the prescription route. But luckily, my body responded well with the regimen that I was doing in partnership with my doctor. I'm gonna make sure, in partnership with my doctor. But now I'm growing a community of other friends and ladies who are majority are people of color, and it's just been an amazing opportunity to do essential oils and to really connect it with our cultural history and identity. And I think that's where I'm at now, present in this season, is trying to identify in what ways can I connect with that part of my ancestral history, being Puerto Rican and Mexican. As a little kid, I have these memories with my grandma before she moved back to Puerto Rico. My hair wouldn't grow when I was 3 years old. And so I have memories of her just like lathering like coconut oil all over my head to make my hair grow. And then recently, I learned from my dad that my grandmother and his mom on his side used to have an herbal garden, and she would make oils from it. And so and he unfortunately doesn't have any of her recipes or anything, and so that just made my heart really sad that a piece of our ancestral history has now been lost. And so I'm on this quest of what does it look like to learn more about my ancestors and past generations and how they used herbs and oils as a way to help maintain their health and wellness.
Yeah, and I feel like these conversations are what is really important to keep our culture, our cultural legacy alive. Because like you, I was not taught how to cook any like Mexican meals, and I am doing the work now to like learn that stuff and teach myself and find people that are going to walk me through what that looks like. And because it's so important to be able to pass that down. But I really appreciate how you talk about mental health and how you talk about, like, even in the oily business, like that space is also, to me, before I knew you, like talking about it, what is a very white space.
Yeah.
And I really appreciate that you are making room for other people of color to see themselves doing this business, because it's another stream of income that can potentially like help them transition either from the work that they're doing to something else that they're passionate for, or just be a supplemental income that they can like invest in their own family.
Yeah. In my own financial journey too, around the same time, one of the greatest advices or things that I kept hearing was you need to diversify your income. You can't just have all your streams of income coming in one bucket. And so last year is when I started doing the oily business, and I'm like, I'm doing this, one, because I believe in it, but two, we need to diversify our income. And I am so grateful that I did that, because now with COVID and drying up my wedding season, no longer being able to do weddings right now, for who knows until when. While it's not at a place yet, my business is still young, it's still growing, but it's a stream of income that's still at least coming in that hasn't been lost due to the government shutdown, and so, or the shutdown of Illinois. And so for me, I'm just really grateful that I've been intentional over the last year or so in trying to figure out how to diversify my streams of income, and even again gaining language, because I don't think that's something that, at least for me, that's not something that was taught. Like, how do you build generational wealth? How do you diversify income? Like, what does that even mean? What is passive and residual income? And so for me, I chose to partner with Young Living to be able to do that. And you know, everyone's story within the Young Living business is different. For some, it takes a few years to really see results. For some, it takes a lot of years. And so I'm just sitting in this as income potential for what it can be in the future. Right now, I'm just laying the foundation and focusing on really building authentic community and really creating, again, a space at the table that says, hey, we're here and there's nothing weird about it. It's not brujeria. Like, I think we've been so constructed to believe that anything other than Western medicine is wrong. And so that's something that I'm seeing coming to the forefront is the more I'm leading classes and connecting with other Latinas and Latinos, debunking some of the ideas around what does it mean to use essential oils and how can you implement them as a part of your health and wellness journey.
Yeah. And I specifically appreciate you sharing how like mental health is a real thing.
Yeah.
I feel like I have shared a little bit about it on like social media. I talk more about it when I'm like one-on-one. But especially in like the Latino community, it's not considered
so taboo.
it's not like a thing. And so like my journey, I kept really quiet, like even talking about it with my family. I've just kind of gone through certain parts of it alone. And so I recently started sharing and have been like really overwhelmed with encouragement and saying like, hey, no one talks about this stuff. I really appreciate it. And even like, I feel like mental health or like that journey or even seeing someone and talking through that stuff is like, I know that first time I went to a therapist, I was like, hey, these are the things that I'm struggling with at home, and can you help me like navigate some things that I'm coming across in my kids? And she said, well, what about you? And I was just like, what do you mean, what about me? She's like, have you, like, what's your anxiety like, and what's your stress level? And I'm just like, I'm not here to talk about me. I'm here to talk, like, give me some resources so I can help my kids. And so that's like another thing, like we don't think about mental health as something that we can go through because it's so taboo. Like you just don't talk about it.
It's like you don't talk about anything. It's swept under the rug. You don't talk about feelings. You don't talk about any of that. Absolutely. So mental health, I call myself a mental health advocate. I'm just like, that's my advice to anybody. Go to therapy. Like if you can do it, do it. Like if you don't have insurance, there's other options out there. There's tons of nonprofits that offer like, 8 to 12 weeks of free sessions. It's finding out about those resources and connecting with the resources because they exist and they're out there and they're available. But it's really first getting over that hump of destigmatizing or normalizing is the language that I use. Normalizing mental health and recognizing that this is something we need to be talking more about, and we're not crazy. We're not crazy because we're sad. We're not crazy because we have depression or anxiety. Like this is okay. We can live beyond it, and there's coping skills that we can learn to overcome, our struggles with it.
Yeah, or we shouldn't just suck it up and like move on, which is something that I am working through because usually I just tell myself, look, this is just how it is, suck it up, let's move on. But yes, I like how you are an advocate and you speak openly about it because I feel like it's so important to see someone speaking on it that looks like them and can understand their cultural upbringing.
I think it is important to find someone who's culturally competent though.
Yes.
Because, if you're going to see a therapist was, again, majority white, they have to be culturally competent or find someone who is competent and understands the nuances and complexities of our lived experiences, because then it's going to be through a very narrow lens and it's not going to be helpful.
Yes, for sure. I feel like even though I was going through to a therapist at one point, I felt like there were some parts of me that I was still keeping to myself.
Same here. I did the same thing.
So I appreciate your advocacy, and I appreciate you tying and speaking about the oils to our culture, because a lot of times, like I said, we don't see a lot of people of color doing this type of business, and especially tying it back to our roots and acknowledging the cultural aspects of what oils and pursuing mental wellness and health wellness means like to our culture.
Yeah, and typically we're only like a generation or two separated from being migrant workers. So my great grandfather from Puerto Rico, he was a farmer. And so it's in my bloodline. It is in my ancestral history to work with the land and the plants and to use it as a form of living. And so the more I'm learning that, the more I'm like, I want to learn more, share more, I want to learn. So I'm actually working on potentially taking an herbalism course with a woman who's from Africa, but lives in Puerto Rico with the Taino community. And so I'm super excited to just learn from her and for it to be not white centered, and to learn from her lived experience, and then recognizing how cool would it be to go back to Puerto Rico, because for me Puerto Rico is an area of trauma for me, and so how crazy would it be that the place that is the most place of trauma for me is also a place that could be the most healing, as I do this herbalism program through her. So I don't know, I'm not 100% sure yet if I'm gonna do it, but I'm pretty sure I am. And I'm just excited for what's to come and to continue to dive in deeper and really identify how to connect with that part of myself, and then help others to connect with it, and to realize that this is so ingrained in our culture and there's nothing taboo about it.
Yeah, that's amazing. I can't wait to hear. When you take that.
What I decide. We'll see.
Okay, so I do want to talk about. I feel like a lot of what I do is to talk about these topics, and but also send out encouragement for the next generation. The things I do is for my kids to be able to pass down my culture, for them to see and be proud of their Mexican heritage, their Mexican roots, and to be able to pass that down to their kids as well, and to continue this education. So I want to ask you, what is the most inspiring feedback that you've walked through to bring you to this place, to the present?
Okay, good question. I've been thinking about this. I'm like, how do I answer this? I would say, and let me know if I'm answering the question not in the way that you intended it to be. I think the greatest feedback that I am receiving from friends and from those who are watching and listening to our story has just been like, wow, your vulnerability and transparency is so inspiring. And if you can do this, and I can see you doing it because you've allowed for us to be the part of the process, then maybe I can do it too. And so it's giving others hope that their dreams, that their hopes and desires are possible. And so that's been the greatest feedback I have received. Am I answering your question right? Okay.
Yes.
Another, some more feedback that I'm receiving is, again, with just the health and wellness, mental health is huge. I get so many, especially people of color, reaching out saying, thank you so much for talking about this. I actually want to see a therapist, but I don't have insurance. Who can I see? I think there's tons of people guide people towards finding someone who takes insurance, and that could be very limiting. And so I've had a lot of friends reach out to me and say, where can I get help where I don't have insurance, but maybe they do a sliding scale. So I've been putting a resource list together so that friends, no matter where you fall on the income level, at least know of different options that are available for them.
Yeah, you answered the question. That's
okay.
And so I know that it has been a journey to get through, but I want other people to know that even they've experienced some of these things, and maybe this is the first time people are hearing a conversation like this. Maybe it's the second, third, or they've been hearing it but it hasn't struck a chord, or they haven't had that moment of, oh, this is, I've experienced this too. Can you talk about what past ideas or patterns or limiting beliefs you've had to work through? Because I feel like when we talk about the patterns and the things that have like held us back or have been those pivot points, like that's where people can start to relate, like, oh, I had that, or like I thought that, and that's not true. So can you share a little bit?
Yeah. So I think the biggest thing for me was getting into therapy. Like, I stalled so long. When I finally found someone that I thought could be a good fit for me, I stalled like even like 3-4 months before reaching out, and then another month to actually get an appointment scheduled.
Yeah.
So I would say overcome whatever limiting beliefs that you have about therapy and what that means and what that looks like. It's a challenge. There's going to be a lot of exposing, a lot of uprooting, and I think that's part of the process. We need to uproot lies and beliefs and limiting beliefs that we've believed about ourselves. So some of the things that were exposed to me was poverty mindset or limited thinking. I wasn't aware of it, but there's this thing called maladaptive mindsets that I learned through my therapist. There's like 18 of them, and I would say that especially for those who have experienced trauma, we tend to play out of them. And so for me, the two that I recognized immediately was abandonment. So I mentioned that I was raised by a single mom. My dad left before I was born. And so while my relationship has been reconciled and healed with him, and we're like on amazing terms, the damage of abandonment and how it impacted my brain was still there. And so I needed to learn coping skills through therapy and how to rewrite those pathways in my brain so that I can not operate out of an abandonment mentality. And so the way that I saw that playing out was in my relationships, in my friendships. I took on this belief that everyone I loved at some point would leave me or die. And I was actually confronted by that with a friend who was diagnosed with breast cancer. She had battled it, went into remission or no evidence of disease, and then it came back, and she ended up passing away from breast cancer. And that season and that friendship for me was one of the most healing friendships that I had experienced, because it was an invitation for me to really confront the lie that my friend might die, but that doesn't mean she doesn't love me or care for me as a friend. And so what does it look like for me to be a friend for her in this season through her journey? And so that was something I had to confront and overcome, was that not everyone is going to leave me because of a certain reason. And that was really hard for me. I think I'm still navigating through that. I still struggle with it. Another thing was, it's called failure to succeed. So I took on this mindset that everyone around me is meant to succeed but me. So when I saw my friends in the wedding industry that started around the same time as me getting 20-30 bookings a year, and I was getting only 5, I believed it's because I'm not meant to succeed. And so that was another thing that I needed to overcome and confront and really challenge, that no, there's enough of the pie, right? Not operating out of scarcity, but out of abundance, and believing that there's enough of the pie, not just for my friends to thrive, but there's enough for me to thrive too. And what does that look like? And then the last thing, which partners with that a little bit, is poverty mindset. So just believing my life is meant to be a life of struggle. It's meant to be one of lack. And not, I'm not one who believes in like prosperity gospel or anything like that, but really challenging the mindsets around the American dream. You know, what does it look like to have this perfect life? Challenging that, while saying, what does it look like to live within my means, within my budget? And while I may not be, quote unquote, financially on paper where we might want to be, but what does it look like to be free in my mind and to know that we can manage and steward and live a full life with the budget that we have? And then also my money perceptions. So my relationship with money. So growing up in a low income home, not really knowing, you know, is the fridge going to be empty? Are we going to be able to do laundry at the laundromat this week? And so those were different things that I had to overcome and believe that my life is, I don't know. And I don't even know if I want to say that, because I think struggle is a part of life. And so this idea that our life is never going to be one of struggle, I think is not true. I think we're going to have highs and we're going to have lows. There's going to be seasons where we have much and there's going to be seasons where we don't. And so how do we navigate through that, and how do we find contentment in the process of that? And that's really what I had to confront, that maybe the American dream really isn't all that it is, and maybe my ideas don't fall in alignment with it. And so what does that look like, and what does that mean for me as an individual and as a family?
Yeah, that's so good. Thank you for sharing all of that. So how would you then take that and send out encouragement or advice or just something for the next generation to be lifted up and built up?
Yes, so I'm a tangible person. I like to give some practical ideas on what you can do. So something that I tell my friends is I tell my friends, I'm like, create a joy and meaningful list. Because what brings me joy and meaning may not bring you joy and meaning. So for me, what brings me joy is decor and making my house look cute on a budget, right? And so because that is something that gives me meaning, I can stay rooted in that, versus maybe you love like fashion and plants, and so you allocate a budget and your lifestyle around that. But that's what brings you joy. And so that's okay. So that's what I tell people. I'm like, first identify a joy and meaningful list. What brings you joy? What brings you meaning and purpose? And then from there, it helps you funnel through the decisions that you're going to make, right? So for us, we're in experiences over things family. For us, experiences bring us joy. So we don't have a budget to just buy things for the kids. We create our budget around, and I know I'm saying budget minded, but I think it's all interconnected.
Yeah.
And I say that because for us, we want the experiences with our kids. And why do we want the experiences for our kids? Because we didn't have that when we were young. My husband and I both grew up in single parent homes. And so we're trying to write a new legacy for our kids. And experiences for us is where it's at. So we allocate our decisions, the way we live, based off of the things that bring us joy and meaning. Another thing I love to share with my friends is, and you could do this all in a journal. Another thing you can do is take some time to write down the lies that you believe about yourself. Yeah. And I continually do this in my journal. Write down the lies that you believe about yourself, and then find either affirmations, or if you're a person of faith, scripture that combats that lie with truth, and partner yourself with the truth versus the lie. And then the last thing that I invite my friends to do is create and imagine lists. And I think imagining is very different than dreaming. I think dreaming leads to goal setting and creating physical goals. I think imagination eventually leads to dreaming, but imagination allows for us to take any sort of limitations that we have about ourselves and take them off and really write down things that maybe we think that we can't do. So for me, that was the firehouse. Yeah. I had that on my list. I was like, there's no way we can buy a firehouse. There's no way we can do the nonprofit, right? I believe these lies. There's no way we could fund the firehouse dream. And so I would write down things on my imagine list like the firehouse, financial freedom, being fully funded, brand new windows in the house, right? And I kid you not, the more I have imagined, the more it has allowed my brain the creativity to figure out how these things can become a reality, which then leads to dreaming, which then leads to goal setting. And so those are some tools that or recommendations that I would make in terms of how to combat maybe some lies that we believe about ourselves and really trying to live from our authentic selves.
Yeah, that is so good. I'm going to have to re-listen to this and write down and take notes. Yeah, that is really good. I am so grateful that I have had the opportunity to have a friendship with you and to grow with you together. But I really appreciate you being able to sit down and have this conversation with me, because every time I leave, I said in the beginning, every time I leave a hangout with you, I'm so inspired and encouraged, and I just wish that other people could like have that poured into them as well, and to be inspired to dive in and look into their own lives and to become like challenged and grow and learn so that they can then impact the next generation. So thank you so much. Before we leave, I want you to share where everyone can find you.
Yeah, so I'm mostly on Instagram. It's Authentic Adventure Co. all together, no spaces or underscore. And then the Firehouse Dream is the same thing. The Firehouse Dream, no spaces or underscore. So that's where you can find us.
That's great. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you for having me.
If you watched Issa's episode last week and then watched Jasmine's episode this week, you'll notice how much the blonde in my hair has grown out since the first time, and how my makeup this time around is like the most basic ever, COVID life. But since this was filmed, I was asked to be part of the board for the Firehouse Dream, which I'm super honored to be part of such an amazing vision. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this chat with Jasmine. You can find all of her information on the website, elevatinglacultura.com. And like I said in the interview, if you enjoyed this chat, this conversation, please share, send me a DM. I always like to hear from people and how they have resonated with the stories that I share. So go and enjoy the rest of your day, afternoon, evening, whenever you're listening, y nos vemos next week.